First of all, I am not Doug Scott. I'm Joe Friedel. I work with Doug. He's in a hospital delivery room awaiting the birth of his son, so we wish him well today. Doug and I work at Ogilvy Entertainment, and our group creates entertainment and programming that helps brands connect to their audiences, hopefully in ways that traditional advertising can't do on its own. We exist because we've taken as a given, as I think many people have, the subtitle of this panel, which is to say that the relationship between consumers, media, and advertising has been transforming, is transforming, will continue to do so. So I'm very eager to hear what our panelists have to say on the topic, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce them. Peter Gardner is the Chief Media Officer at Deutsch, where, among other notable accomplishments, he made a guest appearance on season 1 of The Apprentice. He was also instrumental in launching the product placement company MediaBridge Entertainment, which introduced pay for performance as its core offering. Welcome, Peter. Tim Hanlon is Executive Vice President of Denuo, a consulting practice within Publicis. Tim oversees the unit's strategic partnership and equity investment activity. Then he is focused exclusively on new media platforms and technologies. He holds formal advisory roles with over 30 startups. We'll look for some investment tips from him as well. Frank Cooper, actually no, I'm going here in order. Damon Bethel is Digital Director at MediaVest New York. He leads the development strategy for Coca-Cola's portfolio of brands on the digital side. Most recently, he developed with MSN the Diet Coke Daily Access Program, which is a branded digest of culture and style. Federico Grosso is Senior Vice President of Business Development at Blinks, the world's largest video search engine. We'll talk a little bit more about what makes Blinks unique during the course of the panel, I'm sure. Prior to that, he was at Yahoo, where he served in the startup capacity for several initiatives at Yahoo Italia. Welcome, Federico. Frank Cooper, we're very excited to have here today with us. He's Vice President of Marketing for Pepsi North America. He oversees a $6 billion portfolio that includes Mountain Dew, Sierra Mist, and Tropicana Twisters. Frank is an interactive and cross-cultural marketing expert with a fascinating background in the music business and content development business. At one time, he was an editor at the Harvard Law Review, but as far as we know, he wasn't a guest on The Apprentice. Christoph Stadler comes to us from Germany. He is CEO of MRM Germany, which is a unit of McCann World Group. MRM basically is a matchmaker building relationships between their clients and its clients and their customers. They are a leader in CRM, and we look forward to his perspective on developing relationships in a world of fragmented but contextual media. Welcome, Christoph. So with that, I think if we could just start off with trying to come up with a working definition of what we mean by contextual media and advertising. And then I'll take it from there in terms of a few questions I'll have for the panelists. Discussion will hopefully go along on its own, and we will have about 10 minutes or so for your questions at the end. So anyone want to tackle that one first? What do we mean by contextual media and advertising? Damon, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I'd submit it would have to do with adjacency and whether it's subtle integration adjacency or just relevance by simply being adjacent to some type of content.
Okay. Anything else in terms of what we mean by contextual media? Frank, you're looking at me like you want to answer the question.
No, not really. I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea. Look, I think for me, contextual media is really about having to think more specifically about the context in which we're telling stories. And that's all it is. And it's not very different from what we've done before, except now different players have to play in different contexts. So if you're an advertiser of a consumer packaged goods company like Pepsi, you used to be able to think only about the context of a 30-second spot. Now, you better understand what's happening in the world of video games. You should understand what's happening with broader story-based entertainment like alternate reality gaming. You should understand what's happening in the mobile devices. And when you think about stories in different contexts, you have to think about what kind of voice is appropriate. what kind of structure is appropriate, what length is appropriate. So those contextual changes the story form, and that's how I would define it.
I think that's an excellent working definition for what we're hoping to get at today. And actually, Frank, if I can stick with you for a minute as a start. Clearly, those contexts in which those stories are unfolding is changed dramatically, as you eloquently pointed out. Has advertising kept pace in terms of evolving to the same degree to which media has evolved?
Yeah, I think it varies from company to company. I think some companies are doing a fantastic job in trying to keep pace. But the interesting thing is that everything around us has evolved, right? Culture has evolved significantly over the past 25 years. The technological economic base has evolved tremendously. I was talking to someone the other day, and it's just amazing when you think that the PC really got introduced in the mainstream in the 80s, laptop only in the 90s, and that's just a blink away. And so it's amazing that just happened. Meanwhile, you have, and that's by the way affected consumer behavior, and some people would even say consciousness. But meanwhile, advertising, for the most part, has stood still, and is trying to make that shift. It's trying to make that leap, and it's difficult because when you're trying to make that leap, your infrastructure has to change in fundamental ways. Your relationship with your agencies have to change. The agencies themselves have to change, and so it's a difficult leap. And what we've been successful at so far is kind of making inroads in areas where people have not played traditionally. And I think a lot of people in the panel can speak to this. What's happened, things that used to be viewed below the radar, we could get away with it. And so people would say, okay, Frank, if you're over there doing something in video gaming, that's not really going to have a huge impact, right? This is several years ago.
Right.
And so do what you want to do. And so you got to play freely in that space, and it allowed us to actually start to catch up with some of the other things that are happening in the world. So yes, we're behind, I think. I think some companies are starting to catch up and keep pace, but it's a varied lot out there.
Yeah. You know what's a really good example of that is video or television becoming video, because you think about it, let's talk about contextual advertising in television and or video environments, right? So anybody who watches a program in high def, right, clearly knows how painful and jarring it is to see an ad that shrinks down to a 4:3 aspect ratio after having watched a 16:9 1080i or 1080p kind of, compelling video, right? And that's been going on for a number of years, right? I mean, every Super Bowl we keep talking about where are the advertisers stepping up with the HD-ready ads. There's to your point, right? There's already a disconnect between the programming and the sort of advertising things that are supporting it. You juxtapose that with what's happening in online video, which nominally is more progressive. You're still held back or retarded, good word, by the creative agencies' inabilities and or sometimes the media agencies' inabilities to think outside the 15 or 30-second box, because what was created for TV, a TV campaign, is just simply digitized and thrown into an ad network or a simple sort of video offering. And what gets lost in that is the ability to do more contextual stuff like we could do in search, graphical overlays, other image forms and stuff. The reality is it actually starts, and this is a huge softball for creative people, right? The creative issue, if you've just created the video or the TV ad as a TV ad, that's going to painfully affect you in any possible opportunities later on down the road. And what needs to happen at the very early stage is to create something more flexible and malleable to be contextual in those environments as they start to iterate their themselves. And HD, to me, is just the most glaring, egregious problem right now, but it's playing out in online video too.
Let me just add it.
Yeah, please.
You hit an interesting point. The reason why, there's two reasons why it's hard. One is the pace of technology is outpacing our ability to kind of keep up and develop with it. I mean, everybody, you open up the Times, the Journal, you name it, every day. There's 14 new things. So the ability to create to that and be totally on top of it is pretty tough. And I think we all struggle with that every day. But you were hitting on something, Tim, that was interesting. We did a campaign 3 years ago for a underarm deodorant, classic case. Way underspent versus competition, low market share, hasn't grown in years. And at the point we started was, we got to make this thing contextual to, 'cause it was to middle-aged men. Mitchum, anybody who's a heavy sweater might know that brand. And we started at the beginning saying, we're going to make this thing contextual, and we're going to do it in an inexpensive way, and sort of weave the fabric of the media planning with the creative development. And I won't tell you the production numbers, but we created 23 spots, all designed to be contextual in the TV that they ran, 120 different executions at outdoor, I don't know how many hundred of online spots. Same with radio. So, but it was, to your point, it had to all be created at the same point. Media had to know what creative was doing and vice versa. As you're thinking about the production of this stuff, how are you going to produce this stuff in a way that makes some sense? And I'm talking about a pretty low-tech example of how to really make contextual messaging work. But it's sort of what we're faced with every day. It's sort of making sure the media and creative are done in a way that's linked and organically done so that you don't have these sort of disconnects that you're seeing in HD, because I totally agree with you.
But part of it is, and Fed, you've got to jump in here, is, what you're sort of not saying sort of overtly is that maybe the method in which the creative or the advertising agency is structured or set up, maybe with a media department or a media function or a media agency and a creative agency, and they're not quite, this whole, we have siloed ourselves into
Right.
just this close to irrelevance,
Yeah.
right? If we keep talking about sort of our little specialties and we don't really learn to more aggressively cross-train ourselves, and I think creative and media is like the ultimate cross-training environment, you could argue that the agency structure is not going to be relevant to marketers' needs.
Yep.
And media companies and other entities will step up and just do it for us. And that's what I fight every day in my organization. I'm sure we all sort of have our similar struggles in our own respective places too.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating point that both you and Frank touched upon in terms of structurally, both, I'm on the agency side, so I'm always complaining about clients, but clearly it's the agency as well is facing some challenges from a structural standpoint in order to deliver the kind of contextual messaging that's going to be relevant to our people. And because it's always nice to be nice to potential clients, Frank, how has Pepsi managed to structurally meet this challenge? Because in terms of the content that you guys are delivering repeatedly with the partnerships with video games, funding the creation of movies, for those of you who know about First Descent that Mountain Dew did a couple years ago, what was the sort of structural change in an organization as large as Pepsi that led to those successes?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's being done right now on a case-by-case basis. We haven't really achieved a model where we've fundamentally changed the structure in our relationship with the agencies. Because the ideal world is one in which we have an agency or a set of agencies that would collaborate to develop holistic experiences. That's the ideal thing for us. And if we can get everyone to sit around the table, from a digital side to a grassroots side to television or whatever it might be, develop big ideas and let them kind of manifest themselves in different areas, that's the ideal world.
Right.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that
Right.
way in the real world.
Right.
In the real world, there are fiefdoms, there's money at stake, and there's agency relationships at stake, and so you still have some divisions. Where we've been successful is where the brand manager has taken the lead role and has set at the center. And a lot of brand managers are uncomfortable with this because normally we would abdicate a lot of creative input to the agencies and would say, you guys drive it and we'll kind of make certain evaluations. Well, now, in this era, and I think this is going to be this way for quite a number of years, the brand manager has to sit in the middle and serve almost as the general contractor or the conductor of the broader experience. And so we've done that on First Descent, which is a documentary that we did on snowboarding a few years back. We did that more recently on a project called Democracy. It's a Mountain Dew program where we basically created an online experience that leads to a real-world product. We went out and we got Forrest Whitaker, and we said, Forrest, help us develop the story. He shot a 3.5-minute live-action movie that migrates into an animated world that allows consumers to develop a product. He developed that whole experience, and then we brought the agencies to the table. We said, our main ad agency, our digital agency, our in-store agency, here's what we're developing. Now let's all brainstorm about how do we make this the most impactful experience for consumers. And that was really successful for us, but it only happened because we drove the process that way ahead of time. And it's not structural. So the next time, someone wants to do it, the brand manager, again, has to come up with the idea and become the center of gravity in the entire experience.
Anything from any of the other panelists, particularly from the agency side, in terms of addressing that very question, structural? Go ahead,
I think it's
Christoph.
the word disconnect, I think, is one of the most important ones. Being a European, I looked at the leading American market and saw how we have budgets developed and evolved from 2000 to 2006/7. And it's amazing that we do always talk about change and how things are seismically transforming. If you look at the way how media is put and the media bets are done, almost nothing has changed. 2000 we spent $6 billion. In 2006 was $9 billion US dollars. I don't think that's a seismic change. This is just like normal evolution. So I think the biggest change about to come is to get money out of the media side and put it into the content creation side. And I think this is the big shift that you also refer to in terms of creating this huge amount of content in order to be contextually relevant to the audiences. And I think this complexity, first of all, the messaging, the involvement and engagement of the consumer, all this, how to run this thing. I haven't seen a consulting company understanding it fully. I haven't seen agencies yet fully being developed, and in all respect, I've hardly seen clients driving that because they're still doing the old bets. And I hope that 208 will be the year of the transformation. I hope this 207 too. We hope that 99 and 98, we made big bets that time. I think it's coming now to a CMO, CEO level that there's an urge to change because we disconnect from the consumer.
But you know, part of that challenge to me is that if you look at a lot of the Fortune 500 companies and the people operating it, you know, particularly brand managers, they are trained to manage risk. And so when you say shift dollars from a place where I can actually explain all the way up and down the ladder how that money is spent, and I have mechanisms in place, whether they're accurate or not, to say this is the impact it's having, then that's a
You're trained to think that way.
For risk-averse people.
Absolutely.
And the average tenure of a CMO is 2 years. So
And declining. You know,
Right.
so I think that's part of the problem, and we need, on the other side, we need some tools, some measurements, some shared view of the impact that it's having. 'Cause, you know, I look at Blinks and I love it, right? I went on the site the other day and I love the visuals on it. So let's say I wanted to shift all my money there. I need to have some backup to show that here's the impact it's having. Otherwise, we'll call it a test,
Yes.
and then I'll
Yeah.
throw a little bit of money at
Right.
it, and
No
then
one do
we'll walk
anything.
it.
But sorry,
I'd be happy.
we have this privilege that we work with one client called Microsoft, and they've got this very tiny advertising budget globally, and they're clear saying that by 2010 they want to put 50% into digital. So I tell you, the challenge is to put this money into digital. I mean, you cannot put this all into Google because of Obama doesn't like it. But I think you have to find ways like how do we put this into content, Hollywood production, everything. I think there's a big shift coming here, and some of the clients have said we're going to go for new big bets. And making a $100 million US media bet for a 30-second commercial, I think is a very daring thing.
Right. But it's not seen that way. And I think you touched on measurement. I want to come back to that. Christoph said something potentially controversial. I want to get back to the media guys on that, which he said money should come out of the media budget to create content, which is an argument I make all the time, but I'm seldom successful on it. So what do the guys who have their hands on the media levers think about that? Damon or Peter, any comments on, because at the end of the day, it's all about who's controlling the dollars and where they're coming from. So any reactions to Christoph's comment with respect to that?
I think it's, you want to go?
No, go for it.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's any rules to this stuff, obviously. So, I mean, what we're doing is we've got sort of a development set up on the media side as we're looking at things that are developmental, not sort of standard things that we're doing. And we've created, it'll be announced soon, a content studio so that we can kind of marry those development activities. And the creatives can actually have a lever in which to kind of develop as this media stuff is coming. And so we may see that shift happening. I mean, we don't have a plan to say take the money out of it and do it. I think a lot of people think maybe too much money is spent in production. There's so many ways. I mean, I think, not to get too far away from your question, I mean, one of the big things we're seeing, and you talk to anybody who works in a production house, is reducing the cost, and there's a lot of offshore ways to do this now, reducing the cost of video, in particular production, and you know, obviously even digital. That's a huge thing, and there's enough tools now available, you know, to be able to sort of distribute that in a way which creates the relevance you're looking for. But we're trying to marry that media development, things that are happening in the media that are new and different, with sort of a group of people who can develop for that and understand that. And that may see a shift of money towards some of the content side.
Damon, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, you can break it down even further in terms of media channels and the budgets that go out to digital, and I think as far as addressing the digital aspect, it's defining digital now and in the future, I think, is going to be hard. We have traditional ways of defining digital, but moving forward, I think that's going to change as well. So with regard to digital media, the budgets and how those break down, I think you're going to see those budgets blurring between creative production and media as well, along with the disciplines that drive, the forces behind those budgets. So I think you're going to see not only the lines blurring between the disciplines, as they are already, but the budgets as well.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I think the focus on, Fed, I promise you're going to get the chance to talk.
No, I am in a second.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Why don't you?
No, sorry.
So, look, I think a lot of our focus tends to be on media and line items and digital's fair share. It sounds like a repeat of the late 80s and the early 90s when cable sort of came on the scene and argued for its 5% share, which is just, nonsense if you really think about it. It's only going to get more complicated. Only more digital slivers of line items of budgets, of expenditures, further sharding into finer slices. What I'm getting at is that my argument would be that media, like it or not, media options have historically been kind of a necessary evil for marketers to deal with, right? There's always been this incongruence between the media availabilities that are available to marketers and advertisers to put against, to put money against, versus their marketing needs, right? So a good example would be, I'm a marketer that's looking, from a marketing perspective, I have a product or a service that's appealing to a male target who's 25 to 27 years of age. Well, an ESPN comes in with an 18 to 49-year-old we're strong in males thing, and it's a big incongruent box. It's like the marketer has a decision to make. Do I buy that big box with all that extra waste for a very expensive price, knowing that my target's probably in there somewhere? Or, damned if I don't, not buy it, knowing that it's just too expensive, but I'll try to figure out some other way to reach that audience, even though ESPN probably has it wrapped up. My point is that, my belief is that marketers truly have always had to dumb themselves down, if you will, to what's been available media-wise. And I think one of the interesting and very cool things about digital innovation has brought to us is I think we're starting to see much more of a transparency and an atomization of the media avails, where marketers now may actually want to take all their media budgets back and call it a big old marketing budget, and actually look at, literally granularly choose the things, gerrymander their way to the stuff that they really want. Now the hope is that the media systems out there will have the ability to clear the market of all the unloved stuff, and I believe digital technology will get us there. But my argument is that I think for marketers this could be a dawn of a new era, so to speak, in that they won't have to go through this ridiculous process of dumbing it down and straining it through a strainer through the agency and the media buying and the budgets and all that stuff, where it becomes more of a pure marketing effort, not a media fire drill.
Right.
Right.
And Damon, I assume that's what you were getting at with respect to the lines blurring on the budget.
Yeah.
In terms of that. Federico, you're about to jump out of your seat. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Obviously, I am not from this part of the table. I'm more on this part of the table, for that matter. I am representing a technology company. And there are important things there. First of all, we need to remember that technology is part of the equation. It has been sort of hidden away because, once Gutenberg produced that thing, invented, and then we were fine. However, now with the internet, every day something new is coming up. So there is a responsibility from anybody that is in technology, or represents a technology company, to be part of this ecosystem, to not get lost in jargon. And there is one very good thing that I've seen happening over the last few years, which is this industry is becoming a little bit more incestuous. And by that I mean it's not anymore necessarily the silos are silos and the geeks are staying in one side of the corner. Companies such as Blinks, which is quite technologically advanced, employs people like me. And I am the least of the geeks you can find around. And by that I mean we need to understand each other a little bit more, because nobody ever embraces change. That's human beings. What we can do, we can facilitate that change. And one thing that I would like to throw out here is that you're all talking about very, very big budgets. If you look back at the history of advertising, it's not always the big budgets that drives a shift. You know, it's not true in television, it's not true in print. Big moments in this industry, moments that have actually changed an entire industry and careers and all of that, were actually triggered by smaller initiatives, daring, brave, whatever you want to call it, and definitely initiatives where media owners, technology people, agencies were all talking together, trying to make something happen. Now, to close this, I just would like to bring you some positive, to close my bit, not the conference. Ego check there. The positive news is that I've been doing this with Yahoo first and then with Blinks. And I can tell you, we don't need anymore to explain to clients why they should advertise online. What we need to explain to them and talk to them about and have a dialogue is how to do it. Okay, I don't think that I need to and I'm sure that we all feel the same. So that is very positive. And the other thing that I would like to say is that this new advent of video online actually is breaking down a lot of those barriers. The fact that the internet is becoming much less text-centric and much more video-centric, an open platform, a mass effect is actually probably become one of the arenas where a lot of this conversation can diverge and hopefully create new premises for the future of marketing.
Well, and I think to that point, which is a good segue, I'd like to shift gears now to talk about measurement. So for me, as I'm sure for many of you in this room, a big part of convincing clients, Federico, you made the point of how to do it. A key tool in the toolbox, obviously, is measurement, to show them why they should be doing the how, so to speak. And to the point that Tim raised with respect to ESPN, the truth of the matter is nobody's ever gotten fired for buying advertising on ESPN. So there's still that, I think, native predisposition because we can measure it, we know it. And Frank, you said it better than I could. Even if we know it's wrong, somehow the certainty of measuring it makes us feel like it's the right thing to do. So, media, we can talk about ROI or from a number of different perspectives. I think from a straight-up media standpoint, media can be treated as a commodity sometimes. You buy this much, it reached this many people, your buy was this efficient. But as we all know, media is not just a commodity. It carries a message that hopefully has an impact, can change how people think, feel, et cetera. How are you, I would love to hear from all the panelists on this one, capturing that, for lack of a better term, nebulous piece in terms of impact that we just know intuitively and even rationally from a qualitative standpoint, encountering my brand in certain environments is more, I hate the word because it's not a word, impactful than it is in other environments. But for many people and for many people buying media, an impression is an impression. Not all impressions are created equal. How are you capturing some of the differences from a measuring standpoint, the difference between impressions, that is to say, their impact? Anyone want to jump to that one first? Peter?
Okay. It's a tough area. I mean, environmental research, is sort of one piece of that. There's been a lot of that done over the years. It's a tough thing. What we've chosen to do, for example, with product placement is we've got a front-end measurement, which is sort of a valuation tool, ITVX, if anybody knows the company, which is pretty sophisticated. We've now gone into a partnership with Next Medium, who's got a database-driven thing where they can give you persuasion awareness calls, not unlike some of the things that are on the market. So for that piece, some of that's, a little, how good the information is still at that stage for, a number of occasions for product placement or brand integration. It's a little bit up for grabs, but that's what we're trying to do there. Environmental research is tough. It is on the web, it's easy to do because you can measure some behavioral context. You can see, what the behavior is that's happening with somebody online for different types of placements and messages. When you get outside of that, it's very tough. I was actually one of the guys who did a study in 1985, believe it or not, I'm dating myself, in the magazine space. And this is how much the world has changed. It was a very large office equipment company. They only advertised in business magazines, like Business Week. And we wanted to take them into lifestyle print, thinking busy executives are reading Tennis Magazine and Yachting and so forth, so we got all the magazines to help Annie up, and we did a study. And what you found was you had better persuasion, awareness, recall, everything across the board in the sort of want-to magazines versus the have-to magazines. I think the industry needs a lot of that research. I mean, it needs it on TV. It needs it all over the place. It's especially because we're spending so much time talking about contextual. There's not that much research which can support it. I went online before this conference and was looking at all the studies that have been done back to the 60s just on context. I mean, there's some wild stuff that's been done about the context of a message in various media. It'll blow your mind. I won't bore everybody with those things right now, but do a search on context media. The studies are unbelievable about how deep people were getting into this in the 60s. And there's been nothing groundbreaking done, I don't think, in 20 years in that regard, unless somebody else knows of something.
We're waiting for that. Anyone got a groundbreaking study they'd like to share? Go ahead, Christoph.
I think there's one theme always. It's like about it's brand advertising. It's about advertising, brand building is about storytelling, and whenever we start talking, and I know it by many years of experience being a basement kid doing CRM and digital and all this, we always justify what we do with click rates and response rates, which is important to have. But I mean, the big thing, the storytelling, the brand engagement, the rich video communication, the stories, as you said, finding ways in those new medias to communicate the brand essence. I think this is something which I've not seen solved yet. And having a banner ad on Facebook, I think, is not the solution. Because the thing is, like, once you click on this thing, what is happening after the click? And if we look at the corporate sides, at brand sides and everything, they do everything, but they don't give you a brand experience. They're not done from a brand customer journey type of thing, but they're purely either corporate sides or just brand sides, or they just try to sell you something. And I think this transformation from the 30-second commercial into this new media environment, into proprietary platforms, is something which most of the clients have not yet done.
Right.
And I think because we lack measurement. And how much is it worth if a relevant customer who's about to buy a vehicle for $50,000 US is spending 15 minutes on my site? Is this worth 10, 15 TV commercials? I don't know. We don't have this currency in place, but we know that there's something going on here which needs to be managed and captured, and we need some good analytic skills here, some left-brainers in order to make sure that we get agreed by economics and some measurement systems which are beyond click rates and response rates.
Frank, to you. Federico, then Federico.
Okay. I mean, I think part of the challenge is that we're trying to stretch existing tools of measurement into this whole new area, this new space. And we're in a period of discontinuity, of evolution. And most people, when they think about evolution, they think of it as an incremental step. I think it's a dramatic leap across a chasm. I mean, if you think about the changes that happen and the discontinuous moments of evolution in anything, it's a dramatic, painful leap. And so if I look at GRPs being the measure of something today, I struggle with that because, to your point, and I think several panels have said this, we're really trying to engage consumers in meaningful brand experiences. How do you measure an experience? It's not a GRP, I know that for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you throw out GRPs, but on top of the standard measures, we need better tools that measure engagement, that really get to the interior of individuals. I mean, we're great at the science, but science is all exterior. It's all looking from the outside in a monological fashion. How do you get to the interior? And that's the challenge. And there's some advances, some interesting ones. I mean, neuroscience, for example, I think is one of the most promising areas. And if you're reading Business Week, there have been a ton of articles on neuroscience, mostly attached to the elections. People putting on the EEG caps and saying, do you like Obama or Clinton? Why not? And different parts of the brain light up, and you could say something about that. But I think you can apply neuroscience into advertising in a much more effective way. Behavioral economics is really advancing. Most people are still using traditional models, kind of regression analysis and neoclassical economics, which are fine. But behavioral economics says, there's a psychological underpinning to every human being. How do we integrate that with classic economics? That, to me, is a path forward. And it's not that experimental anymore. These things have been happening now for 25 years. Yeah. It's just now being integrated into the mainstream.
Yeah, and I think also it's interesting because it's another example where we cannot think in silos. Consumers today seems to be in this constant state of divided attention. And we did some study with Harris Interactive, which we published a couple of days ago. And what emerged is that, one phenomenon that is quite strong, at least domestically here, but I believe also in Europe, is this phenomenon of we define as double dippers. So I'm watching television, but at the same time, I am doing my emails, and I am browsing on a site which has got nothing to do with my television experience in the first place. So to try to figure it out actually quite accurately, what is the experience that I'm exposed to in that moment, that's quite challenging. I think it's going to be very interesting.
And I think there's another thing. This is the great thing about this digital ecosystem. The old world was buying reach and then hopefully having great creative that is engaging. And if you want more engagement, you have to buy more reach. Very simple media sell. The new world is about creating engagement. And if the engagement is well done, consumers will share it. I mean, some 100 years ago, they were sitting around a fireplace and talking. Today, we've got the internet. I mean, we've got social networks and everything. So I rather see them as a distribution platform, as a speeding up platform. And what we have to deliver is the right brand message, be relevant. And then we can measure how well this is spread. And I think this is a new set of measurement. It's earning reach rather than buying it. And again, from a media point of view, I understand it's a tough sell, but I'm sure the money will move.
Yeah.
I'd also put out there is with regard to the tools that we need to develop. A lot of these tools are being developed, are available in pockets right now within the various media platforms, and they're maturing quickly. And while these tools are being developed, these measurement tools across every media touch point, including those that you wouldn't think of as endemic, like print or outdoor, for instance, these tools are being developed. And I think what's important there is not just the development of the tools, but the architecture of the agencies or the agency models that are currently in place, and the new opportunities that are out there for agencies right now to grow new disciplines, to have the right people in these new disciplines to run these new tools. So I'd put that out there, that not just the tools that are being developed and the people that develop those tools, but the agency model as it currently exists and the opportunities that are available to us right now to take advantage of this and grow these new disciplines and the people that power it.
Off of that, I think we basically become voracious consumers of data, right, as professionals. And data isn't necessarily the skill set of classic creative agencies, media agencies even. We need to be much, much more skilled in the art of data reception, and more importantly, analysis, and then the ability to take action off of that and, if you will, optimize on a real-time basis, not on a create a campaign, run it, analyze it, think about it, do it again, right? It's always optimizable. It's always living and breathing. And there is, right, an incongruent sort of conversation where the skill sets of the agencies are very classically aligned towards a linear sort of approach. And between marketer and an agency needs to adopt to a more sort of real-time, always-on, living, breathing conversation that may go in numerous directions. That data is going to inform us as to how it's going or how it's not.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing and the numbers are seductive, but misleading often.
Yeah.
And I did a campaign once, and I think it came back. They said, "Hey, Frank, you got 3 billion impressions," and I said, "Wow, 3 billion impressions! We should kill them." Nothing happened. There was no impact. And so I was trying to say, how can you have 3 billion impressions and no one felt it? There was no impact. And for me, it's a shift in thinking that has to go along with the measurement tools. And the shift is, you kind of touched on it, it's going beyond the traditional notions of reach and relevancy, and really trying to find, instead of trying to make a large group, the largest group possible, like what you're doing, I'd rather find a smaller group, a core group that loves it. Because if I can find a core group that loves it, then I feel like I can have an impact.
Actually better, core groups, right? I would argue it's a much more multi-faceted.
I agree with that.
And I think there's another issue where we as classic marketers and agencies are really not good at. It's looking at sort of mass, with all due respect. When you hear the word mass, it's not reach, it's not big enough. That's a cop-out. In today's world, mass is not achieved by sort of a one or two single shot. And I'm sorry to anybody who works for ABC or CBS or Fox that keeps clinging to that notion that the American Idols and the Super Bowls of the world are really where it's still at. In some respects, the answer to that is sure. If you're a fairly accessible product that reaches across a lowest common denominator, it makes a ton of sense to have that kind of reach all in one shot. But I would suggest that the digital realities that we now live in really make it a much more ground troop level kind of activity where you're trying to find groups, plural, of people in various different behaviors, different contexts, different situations, different life cycles, stages, etc. And you, the marketer and or agency, need to aggregate them to whatever scale you need to be a viable business.
Right.
And there's a fundamental shift in the whole marketing premise that I think most people in the process don't get yet. And that's a problem.
And I believe also that you need to bear in mind that especially on the internet, content is not what is used to be, even video content. You do have those big names that you just mentioned, and then you do have all the so-called long tail. But in between, there is an incredible amount of content that was not available before, which is very, very well produced, which has got an appeal to incredibly interesting niches, and now has been put out there. And we can distribute it, we can get access to it. What we are doing, in fact, as Blinks, is we try to get as much deeper understanding as possible of the context of that content in the first place. And then, once we got that, try to match it with consumers and advertising messages.
Right.
Down to the specific word that is said within a specific piece of video content. And I think that is one of the big changes that we have seen happening over the last probably 24 months, not 5 years.
So just to that point, MySpace, YouTube, Dailymotion, and along with dozens of others, we're seeing video content come from anywhere. And so much of this contextual media is driven by where the consumer is. Federico, from your point of view, your company focuses through the use of metadata and so forth on cataloging that content so it can be served up more efficiently, presumably, and in a more relevant way. Do you, and then I'd like to open this up to the panel, do you see a role for anyone potentially to curate that content? In other words, is it all about, out there I find the stuff that I want and I see the dog on the skateboard on YouTube, et cetera. Where, from a marketing standpoint or even from a network standpoint, is there a role for curating that content, or is it all just driven by, hey, we're chasing the consumer in all these different contexts, if that makes sense as a question?
Sure. Well, I believe that obviously consumers are us. So always great respect for that. And I think that if you look at how it has evolved, during 2006, definitely the user-generated content really was emerging as a phenomenon and actually got a little bit probably hyped, and which was good to draw attention to it. However, we have seen 2007 and 2008, from our perspective at least, more primetime TV quality content coming online and more desire for users to access to that. Because to be honest with you, I'm sorry, but dogs skating down the street is not what really interests me.
Right.
And I don't know about you guys, but
surprises me.
that's part of it. It's funny, it's fine, okay, great. My media consumption patterns are more sophisticated. And I suspect everybody's in this room has got. So what we are seeing is that it's not important necessarily chasing the consumer. In the first place, you need to give to consumers good content. And actually, there is a window there for marketeers as well to produce content, which is called branded content, whatever you want to call it, to do it in a proper, intelligent way and engage in, at the source these consumers.
Please. Go ahead, Christoph.
The funny thing on this one is if we talk to our clients and we tell them, let's go for great content and storytelling, leaving aside Microsoft, we did some great stuff for them in this area. Most CMOs tell us, well, it's digital, so it has to be cheap. The funny thing is, since we don't need to put money into distributing the content, we could put so much more money into creating it. Again, it's about measurements and tools, and I think I'm fully with you. There's a window here for quality content, and I don't think, honestly, this Mentos Coke Light thing, for me, only made it feel that if I drink Coke Light and eat a Mentos at the same time, something horrible is happening inside me. I don't think this is really brand building, okay? So I think we have to... I think we've got quality brands that we get handed over by our clients, and they ask us to come up with solutions that help them build brand equity. And I think cheap, consumer-generated, put on your handy camera stuff is not doing it. It might be from an activation point of view, from a promotional point of view sometimes, but I don't believe that this is the way how brands are built in the future.
And also it's very difficult to find any context around that. I mean, to find specific context for some of those clips is a nightmare.
Right. Frank?
Well, first, I better take the video clip of the dog skating off of my mobile phone, right? I'll delete that quickly. But secondly, I think what we're seeing is a structural gap. And Federico, you, I think, summed it up very well. If you imagine a pyramid, at the top of the pyramid, the very top, that's traditional Hollywood, and it's very difficult to break in there. What's opened up in the past few years is the bottom of the pyramid, the whole user-generated content. And I agree, there are some people who are going to want to see that, and it's interesting. It's in the middle where you have that emerging talent. There's some really, really talented people, and we're in this creative period. There's a book by a guy named Richard Florida called The Rise of the Creative Class, where his argument is basically that every single job growth, the job that's growing in the United States particularly, is in a creative class. And I think we're now at a point where every individual feels like he or she is creative on some level. How do you nurture that? How do you leverage that? And then there are gradations of it. Where we're starting to play a lot is at the higher end of that creative talent, but below traditional Hollywood. And it's a fun place to play because the content is rich, the experiences that they can create are rich, and it's at the very highest level. It is cheaper, but it's not cheap.
Yeah. Anything else on this notion of content, user generation versus brands or marketers acting as curators?
Yeah, sure. I'd throw it out there that whether it's on the higher end that you're playing there, which I think is, that's been around for quite a long time, all the way down to UGC and people that don't do it for a living, as well as, then that's on the consumer side, let's say, and then on our side, there's some creative media people out there. So to answer your question about media curation, let's call it, there are creative media people out there. They're obviously the creative groups that have been doing this for a long time. The most important thing, whether you're a consumer or on the media side or creative side, is the authenticity of what it is you're producing with regard to the brand and the contextuality of the brand, whether it's video game development and the authenticity that the brand needs to play there, with the story as well as the contextuality of the brand in that content. So if it's a consumer producing it or it's Hollywood producing it, it's very, very important because the consumer on their end, when they're receiving it, they're certainly going to know authenticity when they see it, especially those that are passionate. When you go out on the long tail or you talk about the gaming space, they're certainly going to know what's authentic and not authentic. So yes, you can get into media curation on all levels as long as it's authentic to the consumer.
Okay, terrific. Let's shift gears briefly. Tim, you've been a very eloquent and outspoken when it comes to the challenges faced by broadcasters. You touched on them in an earlier response in this world of contextual media. But when you look at what many advertisers are still buying, which is audience size, broadcasters certainly deliver those numbers. And even if these broadcasters are aware of the challenges that their own business model is facing, as Jeff Zucker put it, they cannot change analog dollars into digital cents or pennies. If you were the head of a broadcaster tomorrow, or were to become one tomorrow, how would you address this challenge of staying relevant to both advertisers and advertisers from an audience reach standpoint and consumers from a contextual media standpoint?
I think the first thing that you have to recognize is that your traditional method of distribution is no longer sort of a divine right and a scarce resource, right? So, you look at online as basically being sort of the Uber DVR, right? So, I didn't watch Jimmy Kimmel the night of the Academy Awards, but I know all about the Sarah Silverman, Jimmy Kimmel, who's stuppin' who video battle that's going on because of online video. Now, if I'm a network guy, I'm saying, hey, isn't this great? This shows the value of the network and the program and Kimmel and our belief in it and all that stuff. But if I'm an online guy, I'm saying, wait a minute, this had really little to do with the fact that it was on TV, but the phenomenon, the continuous discussion and virality of that is really an online thing. And the answer, of course, is it's actually both.
Right.
They very much, it becomes sort of a 360-degree kind of totality. And whether, or a circle, right? Now, whether you call that circle virtuous or vicious, I guess depends on your background and your vested interest, right? Yeah. And look, if I'm a broadcaster, I need to make sure that I recognize that I'm not just a one-way channel of distribution. It actually now allows me to take some of those brands, whether it's local news at a TV station level or a Jimmy Kimmel show, at a network level or whatever, and leverage those brands into other arenas to be just as authentic and or valuable. So, the upcoming NCAA tournament, basketball tournament, a la CBS, right? They've been chipping away at that for some time, and now we're going to get to a nirvana where we're not going to be held back by the traditional DMA linear exclusivity, if you will, of the TV station in a market. We can now watch every game, hallelujah, outside of a market if our college team happens to be in a market that we're not actually in, right? So this is just an inevitable, but CBS doesn't, I don't think, suffer for that. They only benefit. The key is, can they get out of their own way? Frankly, can any of today's constituents get out of their own way, agencies included?
Yep.
So that they can recognize that, there's actually the beginnings here of a brand, a media brand sort of loosening, if you will, that allows an unlimited amount of opportunities. TV stations are have digital channels now, and they've got HD signals, the ability to data cast, the ability to ramp up their online efforts and be in the online video game. I mean, there's a free license to do that and actually have a head start because they've got brands that matter from another medium. If you're just thinking about it as a solo medium and an extension of that and a preservation of, the channel and the 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock central, you're going to have a real tough time evolving properly because the consumers are already ahead of you in ways that you don't particularly enjoy or like.
I think the networks are doing a great job. I just don't think they've promoted it well. ABC let off their upfront last year with ABC Everywhere. NBC has a multitude of channels. Quincy's done an amazing job with the partnerships to distribute content with over 80 different places. It's the acceptance in the community and the positioning of it that hasn't happened. They fully understand what they've got to do and they're even developing shows in a different way. Quarter Life, though it failed, to me was brilliant because they tried something new. That's going to be the new test bed for the way shows get developed. Online testing, lower cost development, that kind of stuff. But if you don't think they're distributing beyond their core network and their prime time, I mean, to me, it's the biggest story of the network world that hasn't been told in the last 15 months. I mean, it all started with, ABC's deal with iPod, 2 years ago. We're just trying to keep up with it. NBC's got an amazing mobile platform. It's just trying to figure out the way to create message around that I think is stalling the ability to do it. But they've clearly stepped out of several years ago this ability to think about their show runs at prime time. Warner Brothers syndicating 2.5 Men across their local TV stations with a revenue share. It's brilliant. It's going to drive millions of dollars to local stations, give the consumer the chance to watch it when they watch. So I think they've been doing a good job. It just hasn't been well promoted and well accepted yet.
Okay.
I think you also have to look at it as a continuum, right? So I would argue that most people, if given a choice of watching a basketball game or a soccer match on a flat screen HD TV set with surround sound or, a 1x1, postage stamp size via mobile, clearly they're going to gravitate towards the former, not the latter. However, if I'm in the airport and my plane is delayed again, and the bar is watching another game or something else in Spanish that I don't understand, you know what? This actually may be just fine because I have something magical. I have access, right? So I might trade my experience for access depending on the environment or the mindset that I'm in at that point. And if I'm a broadcaster or am I cable network and I'm thinking historically television, I need to be much more malleable in my thinking about how I pump that stuff out to allow people in all their various shades of gray to access stuff the way they want it and recognize that it's not going to be completely the same. The ad message you deliver in the stream on this may be a little different and need to be different than the way you do it online versus the way you do it on television. What I get really worried about are when, and I kind of understand why some of these folks do it, but when the Jeff Zuckers of the world or the Les Moonveses of the world say, see, this proves that the value of broadcast network television is intact, right? It is a bias that is coming out, whether they admit it or not, that all this other stuff is tangential and sort of supportive of the big brass ring. And the reality is, I would argue there are audiences that are actually, and again, the NCAA basketball tournament I think will play some of this out, that may be their only way they're experiencing this, right? And it has nothing to do. And we go back to the measurement thing. If a Nielsen rating takes a hit, does that mean that all the advertising that we've done on television goes for naught? Or what are the metrics on the other environments that need to sort of keep up with the game? So what I'm getting at is that a broadcast television network should be thinking much more holistically about life than just sort of, maintaining the dominance of a channel in linear form. It's absolutely not that way anymore.
Right.
Let me add a couple things we're actively doing that are kind of interesting. One is we spent some time with CBS and Quincy Smith and now Ben Silverman and the people at NBC talking about starting from the head of the content and buying full through. So wherever 2.5 Men appears, you get content integration with it, and then everywhere that it runs, you support with advertising. It's kind of an interesting notion. If you can find that core group of consumers who are into that show and sort of follow them through this path, one thing. And the other thing that leads to this whole conversation that kind of came up before is we're trying to create this whole notion of content rating points around that, where it's getting away from just the GRP. How do you value these video impressions that are achieved elsewhere? And they have different values. So we're trying to come up with this equation. We're using the loose term now called CRPs or VRPs, video rating points, to try to put that in motion so there's a thought process on our side and the seller side to do that. And I think some of the good research that ESPN's doing with Nielsen right now across all their channels is going to help fuel that for a bunch of people, where you can start to aggregate this stuff up. And, if you want to buy it that way, and I think if you find, like our big client, DirecTV, we want that because we know these hardcore sports fans are following, certain shows, PTI across all their content areas, all their distribution points.
I think on that, I would consider also the creative implications on it, because when we talk about rating points, it is back to that linear model. When we talk about the continuum, which I think is a great way to look at it, we get into digital distribution when we look at it that way. We change the way we think about what linear means when we look at it that way. We change the screen that the consumer is pulling it in on. And when we begin to change the screen, we're looking at new data, and we're looking at some creative implications as well, some pretty big creative implications. So when we talk addressability and distribution of that messaging, then I think we want to change the rating point aspect with regard to the composition of who's seeing what when. And when they're viewing it, let's say it's March Madness on demand, and if we are serving our ad to a very specific consumer based on the information on where they are, who they are, what they're looking at it on, and address that consumer the right way with the right creative messaging, and then sequence it out from there. Now that we've begun our dialogue, the value begins to change a great deal with regard to rating points and those types of value.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent segue. I'd like to just shift gears for a moment. As marketers and agencies, a lot of times we talk to ourselves. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer. This past Monday in the New York Times, I don't know how many of you saw it, readers got a glimpse into the many data capture events that companies like Yahoo, Google, AOL engage in order to deliver exactly what you just talked about, Damon, and exactly what we're talking about in this whole panel, which is to say, for me to deliver contextually relevant things to consumers, I have to capture a lot of data about them. That same article cites a study which said 85% of adults surveyed don't want companies to be capturing data in this way. This is a jump ball, guys. Is there a consumer education thing that needs to happen here as we think about, we got to catch up with technology, we got to our agency model needs to change, et cetera, et cetera? Is there a consumer left somewhere in the dust saying, but wait a minute, why are you capturing all this data about me? Why do I want addressability, et cetera, et cetera? If there is a consumer education role, and maybe there isn't, I don't know, who should play it? And as I say, that is a jump ball. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, I don't know if you saw the article or not. But
no, I didn't see the article. The answer to your question, I think, is yes. It's hard to just nail it down, because you have your various media channels, and the consumer, they are engaged in different ways with each of the channels. They're taking them in different ways, and they're not used to addressability in television yet. The information that the distributors, whether it's the MSOs or the networks themselves, have on those consumers they may not know, or they're not used to that information being used in a certain way. So if they haven't experienced it yet, then I wouldn't say that, how can there be a backlash to something that hasn't happened? So I would challenge that now, because there is a responsible way of doing that. And there are great pains being taken right now to decide what those standards are. Part of those standards is the information that's being used. So personal identifiable information and those types of things. The consumer has to remain in control, and they will. How they remain in control, whether it's on an MSO level, or it's on an internet service provider level, or whatever it might be, they're used to some channels having that control. They're not used to others yet, but it will be made available to them. I can't imagine it not being made available to them.
Chris? Yeah.
It's not only the question of like what data is available, it's what we do with it. And this whole discussion about behavioral targeting from a European perspective, it's strictly illegal. I mean, there's like a European legal initiative making sure that things are not tied down to a personal level unless you really opt in as a consumer. So I think the data is there. Yeah, it's scary. And I think only Google knows about myself with all the Googling you do all the day, and MSNing, of course. But I think it's once it's used against you, or like in advertising context, I think this is where legally, at least from a European perspective, we have almost no playground unless the consumer really openly opt into the whole thing, which is, I think, more than just education. You really have to add a big amount of service to the consumer that, like on Amazon, I mean, you accept that Amazon tells you what you should buy on top, which is basically behavioral targeting. But it's an opt-in that you have given in the beginning. If there's no opt-in in Europe, at least you can't do it. I don't know about the US here, but
I think consumers really have to be convinced that the ability for us to addressably serve in a more relevant way, an ad message that may be more appealing to them, that doesn't waste their time nor wastes the marketer's time, which should be a win-win situation. I think we have a really long way to go before we convince a consumer, because there have been just so many false starts and erroneous and sometimes illegal aspects to previous efforts that I think we live in such a consumer-oriented society that's media savvy and very jaded about all those pronouncements. And you know, look at the do not call list here in the United States. It is a raging success right now. People are calling for a do not whatever email list or whatever similar for an online kind of thing, and the spam issues and all that. But you look at the loopholes, though, right? I mean, you know, you're still getting calls from people, but the reality is that there's a loophole in there. If you have a quote-unquote previously existing relationship with a marketer, it gives them the license to give you a call. That could be the most benign activity that you might have done. You may have filled in a contest entry at a football game as you walked into the stadium. Ta-da, you have now a relationship with the company, even though you really didn't think so. So I think a lot of consumers still feel like there's a big hoodwink going on. And I think that's a huge challenge. It's ironic, though, because I would argue that the consumer really, I don't think, wants their time wasted with interruptive ad messaging that's not only not relevant, but just plainly annoying and interruptive.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because the marketer doesn't want to waste their time and money either. Right. And it's a shame because there have been so many sort of false starts and bad apples that you know. And I think we got to really watch it when we get into things like ISP data, like the FIVAs of the world and the forums of the world, you know, and we're now getting into actual original online usage data and using that as the beginnings of a personalization profile kind of environment. Yeah, I mean, you want to scrub it, you want to keep it anonymous and stuff, but we've got to be very careful about not only how we do it, but also how we talk and project it. Yeah. Because I think sometimes the implications or the perception may be bigger than the actual activity that we may be able to do.
As well as the legislation around it too, because there'll be new legislation as these things begin to mature and these technologies and channels begin to mature, and with that said, the legislation around them that will be forthcoming, and you know, for the next couple decades probably has to be done responsibly as well.
Yeah, so it's going to be a question of us policing ourselves or having that done for us by the government to some extent. I think, Tim, there's some element of your answer, actually, which is a good segue, sticking with, from the consumer standpoint, but this is open to anyone on the panel, a lot of the language in the world of contextual marketing talks about brands developing relationships with consumers. It's such an overused word, one-to-one, et cetera, et cetera. From a consumer standpoint, how many of these relationships can I possibly have? How deep of a relationship can I have with the toothpaste that I use, for example? Is there another kind of semantic or linguistic set of tools or a lens through which we can look at this, which may in fact be more useful and less annoying from a consumer standpoint? Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I would, again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about sort of the top-down linear model of marketing and media. I think really the answer at its essence is for marketers and their agencies to be available to consumers when they want you, right? Now, clearly, there's a lot of other supportive activities that can enhance a consumer's interest in wanting you.
Right.
But the reality is you need to make yourselves available and accessible. And online is absolutely the easiest way and the most common way. But I would even argue in ad messages themselves, right? I would argue in a world where DVRs make people very comfortable with the ability to skip ads and not see them, and ad blockers online and those kinds of things. If an ad message gets through in the years to come, it's either somebody's defenses were down or, God forbid, they're actually interested. And if you are just doing it as an impression and the impression got through, you may or may not be successful. You would want to then allow the consumer to go further with that message should they want to, or do with it what they want. Grab it, bookmark it, deal with it later, or literally go directly, say it's a TV ad with a click or a telescopic ad, those kinds of things. But again, that's accessibility. That's allowing somebody, when they're damn well ready,
right,
key point, to go further with it. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be magic for the marketer because they don't want to piss you off. Marketers don't want to waste your time. They only want to reach the people that are going to be interested or could be cajoled to be interested. And then, God forbid, you could actually allow that dialogue to continue. So my point is, accessibility is different than shouting from the rooftop and beating people over the head.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's subtle. It's a subtle skill that I don't think the marketing machine today is really good at.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left for questions from the audience, which I'd like to entertain at this point. Just one rule. We only do have a few minutes. One rule with respect to the questions. If you work for a company or agency, tell us afterwards what your company or agency does and just sort of ask the question. If you haven't, we have about 8 minutes. So anyone in the audience have any questions at this point for the panel? Yes.
I would say that's probably the biggest challenge we face, and I don't have an answer to it. It's something that we're continually searching for. One of the things we try to do, and I think, Tim, you touched upon it, we try to empower the consumer. So we might develop a piece of content, and if we understand where the consumer wants to see this content, we just try to place it there and try to encourage conversation around it and try to develop. An example would be, most people will say, I'm going to upload, if I create a video, I'm going to upload it on YouTube. And that's fine, but what if the consumers really are on a blog, and that's the best place to start? How do we get it onto the blog, and how do we start that conversation? So we're looking at where are the best places to start the conversation, the best places to plant the seeds, and then our hope, and it is somewhat of a leap of faith, is that there's enough viability there with the content, and that it's playing in a cultural sphere that's relevant to them, that they actually want to pass it along and create a conversation about it. So it's heavily reliant on word of mouth and distribution through other digital channels. I've not found the perfect delivery mechanism, nor have we mapped out, the perfect delivery mechanism. Is one other thing we're doing. We feel like, the instinct of a lot of brand marketers at large companies is to always start big, and front page of website X with, you know, a certain number of impressions. We've resisted that temptation now, and we are now starting at the grassroots level, whether it's in the digital space or whether it's in the physical space, to try to find, to your point, those core groups of people that actually will embrace it and start to give it some authenticity and some credibility. And you have to let that nurture and incubate for a while, and it requires some patience, and it feels awkward, I think, for a lot of large companies, but it's been successful for us so far.
I think the question I should have rephrased it, not delivery mechanism, but targeting mechanism, right? Find those people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and as far as the targeting, there's another shift I think we've made. I mean, typical demographic targeting, we still do some of that, but we've moved away from that, and we're now trying to define what we're calling cultural spheres, and it crosses age lines, demographic lines, and geographic lines, and we're just looking for areas where we think people want to be together. I mean, the one-to-one relationship thing is really interesting. I actually personally spend very little time thinking about that. I think about, because people do want to be individuals, but they also want to be part of a group. I play more on the side of what groups do they want to be part of, because it's easier for us to actually drop something in that space where they actually want to talk, want to bind around a particular idea or a piece of content. And so we're looking for those cultural spheres. And again, it's an evolving process. We don't have great tools to actually say, these are the 10 cultural spheres we play in, but you can see it rising up occasionally, like in the video gaming market. There are certain spaces that we know some of our brands can play, like Mountain Dew. And
in not so many words, basically Frank has elucidated a marketing target belief, not a media target desire, right? So it goes back to what I said earlier. This is more pure marketing targets, not what the media targets are available to choose from.
Absolutely.
Right. Right. Excellent. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you, panelists. I think we've learned a lot today in terms of understanding that what we mean by contextual media as new environments in which we tell stories and the challenges we face in telling those stories. So thank you all for your time and attention. Thank you, our panelists.
Yeah, good.